Rock that boogie, get your rocking shoes, we gonna rock and roll. Come on, cats, let's go, go, go.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to El Pachuco Chronicles. This is our first recording of 2025. My name is Jim Ruel. I'm your co-host, along with Ray, and Vanessa's here as well.
Happy New Year.
Feliz Año Nuevo.
And we have a special guest today. Who do we have here sitting next to us?
You have Dr. Denise Sandoval, Professor of Chicana and Chicano Studies at California State University Northridge.
Not only that, come on, you're being modest. You're a historian.
Who are you?
Yes,
Who
tell
are
us
you?
your other. Come on.
In my other
Pretend
life.
I don't know.
In my other life, my other Chola life. I'm a curator. I started, how I met you all actually was for the first show I curated at the Peterson, which
What
was
year?
in 2000 when I was still a grad student working on my
Yes.
PhD. And I think since then, I think you've been part of almost every exhibit that we created there.
Yes.
Especially La Vida Lowrider, Cruising the City of Angels in 2007, where we actually had a whole section on the Zoot Suit riots and even blew up photos from the Library of Congress from the Zoot Suit
We've
riots.
known you too long, Dr. Sandoval.
And for a long time. So, and we're working right now on a new exhibit that will open up at the Cal State Northridge Art Galleries called Bajitas y Suavecitas, which is pretty much all Chicana artists that are visualizing, reimagining lowrider culture through the lens of, feminism. And we'll be having some zoot suits there to represent the Pachucas, of course, because I think what we see sort of in lowrider culture today, you see the Pachuca, but also the Chola, right? So the Pachuca is sort of the origin and the Chola sort of evolves from that. And so I feel like those icons of femininity, the zoot suits as cultural resistance, but more importantly, really emblems of Chicana pride, are really important to include in exhibits that are looking at sort of gender politics and identity.
How do you find time to teach, grade, do all this on the side, and not go crazy?
Going crazy? Yeah.
I think you vent on Facebook.
I have to quote one of my favorite Chicano poets and the Chicano artists of the Movimiento that sort of created a slogan that says La locura cura, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like our culture is important to not just understanding our world and helping us heal and understanding our place here in the United States and our relationship even as being Mexicanos, but also I think for me, through museum exhibits and the cultural projects are important to not just celebrate who we are, but also educate others about who we are, which is especially important in this time period that we're living in.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point right now, educating. And one of the biggest questions that I get all the time is, how do you differentiate, or what is the difference between a Pachuca and a Chola?
Yeah.
Because they call Pachucos cholos, and same with the female version. And then another question, if you would follow up, is, did Pachucas really wear zoot suits? Did they wear the pants? Because I get a lot of arguments and a lot of posts, a lot of negative posts, especially on social media, when we post pictures of females wearing the zoot suit pants. And they say they shouldn't be wearing those, and I get it. We're in a different time where maybe the fabrics that they wore back in the day, they're obviously not what we make in today and age, because times change. But how do you differentiate a Pachuca from a Chola, and where Pachuca's really wearing zoot suits?
Well, I think if you look at the historical photos as a historian, if you sort of go back to the photo, the time period, like there were no shops that were like making like zoot suits, like a lot. Most people were like pulling sort of together, right? Kind of a suit, pants, skirts, what they had or they could afford, right? For a working class community. My great grandfather was a tailor. His daughter, my grandmother, who passed in 2013, he made zoot suits for them, of that era. They no longer exist because when the zoot suit riots were happening and he actually burned them, right? Because he didn't want his children to be targeted. So, I mean, there were probably tailor shops that were doing that. But when you look a lot of those photos, right, that you go into those archives, they're kind of put together, whatever they could sort of put together. And I feel like, especially with World War II, I think was the time period where you saw a shift where women were wearing pants right? You can even watch Hollywood movies, right? It kind of like got taken away of the ideas of like, you're masculine. It's like women could be feminine, you know, especially like I love watching old movies, and you could see movies like look at Lauren Bacall or something, right? She would wear those slick plants, right? So I think you have to think about what we say now compared to like what the historical evidence is, and also that time period when our community didn't have access to spend hundreds of dollars on like tailored suits, right? They kind of rascuache made do with what they had, but so historical photos, I think, give us that evidence. And I think in particular for Pachucas, I'm thinking of the work by on Zoot Suit Women in Pachucas by Kat Ramirez. It's a great book where she looks at how, you know, just by women associating themselves with the Zoot Suits in Pachucas, like they were sort of seen as criminals or like bad women, right? Because like the women that were arrested during the Zoot Suit riots, the Sleepy Lagoon case, those girls that were affiliated with them got sent to the Ventura County School for Girls, which was like a quote unquote, not a jail, but something about reform, like a reformatory, right? And like reforming their behaviors as women, making them good girls, even though they didn't commit any crimes, right? So I feel it's also looking at how in the 40s, not only did you have racism in our legal system, but also sexism as well. So I think part of the larger narrative that people getting stuck on what's, you know, oh, they weren't wearing this and that. Go back and study the history about our community struggling for place here in the United States. And by extension, I also encourage people, our exhibit Bajitas y Suavecitas, at the same time of that exhibit, Self-Help Graphics, which is one of the oldest Chicano art orgs in East LA, started about 50 years ago in 1972. They're going to have an exhibit, a silk screen print exhibit, where they've invited Chicano artists to relook at the Pachuca through their art and even interpret it. Because like some of my friends, like Gen X, even kind of trace the Pachucas and their sort of resistance and seen it as punk rock, right, for the Gen X generation, you know, how it sort of carries over. And so I think that that's important too. There's that historical accuracy, but that larger question of why people use their bodies in fashion to create identity, to build community, and use it as resistance, right, to like the forms of like Americanization.
Well, I love that history. And for those of you listening, make sure you go back and take note of all these events that are coming up and happening. Now, the Pachucas and the Cholas. I mean, we just talked about times and how it changes and fashion. And how do you relate Pachucas to Cholas?
Well, I think the other part of it, right, that you can sort of do a deep dive, because we're sort of talking about aesthetics, and I think what we've sort of disconnected it from is the other side of that we could see quote unquote negative, but I'm not seeing it as that. It's the negative area of thinking about gangs, right? So like Chicano gangs in LA, right, that go back to the 1920s. So there's that other side of it, right, that also was part then, right? Even though the Pachucos were accused of being gangs, and they weren't necessally, but there were gangs.
38.
Yeah, but there was 38th Street Gang, right? Like they were arguing it's more social club, right? But we know, you know, right, there were gangs that go back to the 20s in that area, right? Like Clover, White Fence, right? So the other side, right, I think is thinking about if that evolution exists, that reality of the gang life, fashion, right? The idea of the cholo also comes out of that as well, right? That sort of has sort of those baggy pants, but more the white t-shirt, right? Not so dressed up with the ties and maybe the hat, right? The Pendleton sort of comes into play. So I feel the same thing, right? Of people, how they're using fashion, like what's out there. Like a white t-shirt, that to me reads very working class, right?
Yes.
The Pendleton plaid shirt, very working class.
Yes.
But they're putting a sign of like respect and affirmation to it. You know, my uncle, my dad's younger brother, is a cholo. You know, he's now in his 60s, but I remember as a kid in the 70s, like he would be pressing his pants, pressing his t-shirt, pressing his bandana, right? He grew up in Lincoln Heights, and you can understand maybe what gang he was affiliated. I'm not going to name it, but I think that sense of like pride, right, in what you wear is also really important, not just for Chicanos, but people of color in the United States. Like, of course, we know the Zoot Suit comes from African American culture, and you can sort of think about like, what is fashion? What is your body? how do you express yourself as a Black person, right? As a Mexican American, as a Chicano. And that becomes like a tool of resistance. But more importantly, it begins a space to like empower yourself, because we're living in a time period where there was discrimination, there was housing covenants in LA, police harassment, you know, things like that. So the way that youth do what they can to create a sense of place, right? To create a sense of affirmation. And so I feel the Cholas, that also is very much connected to that same trajectory, right? If we look at gang culture, right? When you sort of looked at Cholas, like let's say in the 70s, right? That was coming out of that, right? Today it's a fashion style, it's beauty.
Yes.
Like I really argue, you're not going to see any Cholas in Cholas anymore that were, you know, it's not, they're not doing that in the gang life, right? The old time generation, like when you bump into some of those older cholas, they kind of make fun of like how the youth are kind of cosplaying, right?
Yes.
Or like dressing up, right?
Yes.
So that's the reality we're also in. So those can exist at the same time, which I think makes culture fascinating. But I think what I find fascinating is how this younger generation, so younger than me, of being Gen X, are sort of using the zoot suit, right, or using the chola style as a way to celebrate being Chicano, right, or how it even intersects with sort of like party culture, right, where they're having those kind of like pop-ups, right,
Yes.
that in South LA in the warehouses, that younger gen, or like what you all are doing and other people are doing too, of like the zoot suit balls, like that just didn't exist, right, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So all of that's wonderful, and I think it also speaks to the way that why our culture matters, why it's important. And I think sort of as a Chicano studies professor, I think my always concern is like, this is fun, this is great, but we also have to know our history, right? We also have to be able to connect the dots.
Yes. So traditions, history, culture, all very important. And it's great that, like you said, the new generation is willing to kind of, it's important for them to take a step back and, like you said, learn about where they came from, why people dress the way they do. But at the same time, it's also fashion. You know,
it's also fashion, and on the other hand, you know, to insert sort of the politics, it is also part. If we look at the Chicano movement, you know, that's when the Chicano artists were looking at the zoot suiter, as Jose Montoya, who I talked about, would say, you know, they were the Chicano freedom fighters, but they really weren't out there registering to vote, things like that, right? I mean, they were just using their bodies as resistance. But the Chicano artists looked at the Pachuco as like celebrations of Chicanismo, right?
Yes.
Chicanidad,
Yes.
right? And I think that's something that's continued, right? It's like with the lowrider, it's sort of the emblem or symbol of Chicanismo, right? So I think that's important too, right? And I think it's thinking of that history is that, like I always tell my students, it's like, yeah, it's great, right, that we're having fun and celebration, and joy is important, right? Joy can be political, but also what are we doing to like uplift our community? Because we're living in a time period where a lot of these civil rights have been dismantled, right? The new generation has to, right, step away from those cell phones of just feeding in on images and like doing something, right, and fighting for their community, for their own rights as well. Because the previous generation, I wouldn't exist if a previous generation didn't sat in on the universities to create Chicano studies, to create civil rights, to create more rights for me as a woman. So if somebody was thinking about me like at 20 years old, right, my responsibility is to continue that and pass that torch, right?
Yes.
And I'm inspired. There's a lot of youth that are very active, and I think one of the things I've seen in teaching Chicano studies as long as I've had, like over 25 years, is this younger generation are very creative, you know, and they're exploring careers in the arts. And I think that's important. We need artists, we need visionaries, and we also need, you know, activists and, you know, academics, organizers. We need everything for these attacks that we're experiencing of civil rights right now in this country.
I mean, we talk about civil rights, and it's like a hot topic right now, especially here in the United States. I mean, we're talking about learning ethnic studies, and what a big topic it's been recently,
Right.
because we want to teach our children ethnic studies. We want to teach our children about history and their culture and things that have actually happened in the United States. and why we are who we are, which is a melting pot of all kinds of races and ethnicities, and that should be celebrated, and we should be able to allow ourselves to be able to learn about everything that is happening here in the United States. So I agree 100%. If you're listening, this is a history lesson by Dr. Denise.
What a way to open up the year.
No, I mean, it's like, you know, what we owe from you know, Pachuco culture is, you know, like stay trucha, man.
Yes.
Right? And that is...
Si se puede.
Yeah,
like
and you know, that's
Cesar
something
Chavez.
that, like, even la cura that came from the streets, you know, but it can be a philosophy. It can be like a practice of how we approach our lives. And I always say, like, if we center sort of social justice and, you know, really radical love, revolutionary love for our community at the center, you know, everything sort of flows from that.
Yes. It's how do you rephrase that and say it in any other way than in the way that you've already said it? We are very happy to have you here today. We thank you for being here.
So much.
Yes.
I'm gonna have to
Thank
go
you
back
for
and
the
listen to it.
invitation. I think my Starbucks vanilla latte helped keep my mind step back into my professor mindset, because, you know, I'm on winter break, so
Yes.
sometimes my mind takes a little shift, but you start asking me these questions and that info is flowing out of me right now.
Which is perfect, because these are questions that a lot of our audience, a lot of our customers and our
We're always
friends and
asked.
family are always asking.
And my
You
daughter,
know?
she's been grilling us on like, what racism did you guys experience growing up? And we're like, where did this come from? She's like, oh, I just wonder. But it is like, I'm just kind of fascinated of comparing what we grew up with, like when I grew up as an indigenous person in Wisconsin, and a lot of the incidents that were happening there in the 80s. But then here in LA, where Fabiola grew up, what was she going through in the 70s and 80s?
And then what is
very,
happening
very different,
today.
how different it can be today.
Yes.
I say it's different and not so different, because, like, when I think about being an undergrad student in the 90s, we had a lot of attacks with here in California, Proposition 187, attacking under Pete Wilson, not just immigrants, but ethnic studies. So we've been through this before, you know, and I think, like, it's, to me, you open up the newspaper or watch the TV and you can get very disappointed. But, like, I just think about the fight continues, right? La lucha continua. We always know that. But I think we have so many people that have a skill set, you know, like even 30 years ago, there weren't a lot of like Gen X professors. Now it's like millennials are becoming professors, but just the resources, community spaces, like whether it be Pachuco, your Zoot Suit shop, or self-help graphics, right? Or Tia Chucha's out in the San Fernando Valley, right? These are all places that are necessary to organizing our community or just having a space to connect, right? And I think that that's really important.
Yes.
And I think that's why
Extremely important.
for my students, you know, what they're going through right now, like to them, it feels like it's all new, you know, so my work as a professor is to connect those dots for them, right? And see, like, similarly, as a student, we had to organize, you know, in the 90s here at Cal State Northridge.
It's one
right?
of those, si se pudo antes, si se va a poder, you know,
Yeah.
and we just have to, like you said, organize.
And I think, like, if you can't take a Chicano studies class, it's even offered, like, in junior colleges to learn. Like, I would say the essential book to start off with is Occupied America by Rudolfo Acuña, which was the first sort of Chicano history book. Came out in 1972. I think it's now on 7th edition. And Dr. Acuña was my mentor and was also the founder of the Chicano Studies Department at Cal State Northridge. And so I feel like it's like that essential Chicano history Bible. And there's so many other ones, right, that you can go to, but I would say start off with that one.
Awesome.
That was one of my questions too.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Denise.
Well, thank you for, you know, opening up the mic for me on a
Always.
Saturday.
You get on your soapbox and you just want to, like,
Do you have any books, or do you have any?
You know,
Anything to plug?
yeah, actually, the one book I worked on that was really important, talking about ethnic studies. So I didn't share a little bit about my past that I think is important. You know, I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley in a city called La Puente, first generation college student. So I was a ethnic studies major at UC Berkeley. That's kind of what sort of radicalized me. I'm actually a community college transfer. I think that's important to answer as well. And so because I sort of have been in ethnic studies from undergrad to grad to now as professor, and also in the scholarship that I do as a scholar. We did a 2-volume book on the attacks of ethnic studies almost like 10 years ago it came out. And so what I'm saying is we're experiencing attacks now, but we were experiencing it then. So it's a 2-volume set that I co-edited with some colleagues called Whitewashing Education, and it's a K through 12 and university. So you can find that in the library if you just also Google search my name, Denise Sandoval. And then the other book that might be out of print, but I keep hitting up Luis Rodriguez to bring it back out. We did a book called Rushing Waters, Rising Dreams, also around 2013, that looked at the role of art activism, or what we call artivism, in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. So, I'm from the San Gabriel Valley. I'm a professor at Cal State Northridge. So the Northeast San Fernando Valley is where most of our Chicano Latino students come from. So those are areas like Pacoima, Silmar, San Fernando, that are like, San Fernando's like 90%, right? Chicano Latino, right?
Yes.
And so Luis had the idea in 2001 to start a cultural center, right? Because this idea that helps heals our community, but creates a space. So we did a book that really was bringing together artists, writers, to collect how they view their community, right? Because I think there's a lot of attention on East LA and the arts, but there's such an active community also in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. And that was something I had to learn about, because, my family roots are very traditional. East LA, Lincoln Heights, we followed Dad's a Vietnam vet, followed the 60 freeway out, bought their first home in La Puente in 1974. So I was very much that traditional, what we think Chicano LA is. But people don't realize there's Chicanos out here in Orange County, right? Out here, Santa Ana, Fullerton, Northeast San Fernando Valley. So I think all of that is really important too, of like, if I could recommend to the younger generation of documenting your history and your community, getting those stories from your familia. How I got into doing oral history was a project I did in undergrad on my abuelitas, oral history, and that kind of sparked my love of like learning history through interviewing people, i.e. lowriders or artists. So that's a lot of the work that I do, what we call public history now, and doing a lot of my work in exhibitions has been part of my contribution.
That's amazing. That's one of the biggest reasons why we started this podcast was because, as you know, we have customers that come from all over the world. And every time somebody would come in, they would tell us their little story. And we would always say, oh, man, that's so interesting. That is so cool. And, we wish we could record that and have that later for somebody to listen to, or just have it in general. And so that's why we started this podcast. And we're here in the middle of the lobby. There's customers. You can hear the dressing room open and close. And I think it's important to have our customers come in and tell us their stories, tell us their history. Because like you just said, it's important to document it.
Right.
And be able to have it on a platform where it's not just heard by the people that are in here in the lobby. When they come in, be able to hear it from everyone. So I want to thank you for not only coming in here today, giving us a history lesson, telling us about your life, your history, where you come from, and why it's important for us to teach. But also, thank you for, I'm looking at a picture of the Lowrider magazine, because you didn't say it, but you are behind the Lowrider magazine, the Women of Lowrider. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a special issue that came out for Women's History Month in March. That was a one-off issue, right? Because the last issue, I think, was in like March of 2020. Oh, wow. So it was a one-off issue that featured all, women writers, but women who are part of the lowrider culture. But it was like women photographers, women writers. Like I was sort of like the editor-in-chief. Jessica Lopez, who worked for Lowrider magazine back in the day, was the editor for it. So, what I always argue is that even though we sort of had that special issue of Lowrider magazine, like when you look at Lowrider magazine, the first issue in 1977, women were always part of lowriding, right? And that's why I love the older issues where you see women like had their car clubs, had their bicycles. So women, we've always been part of the culture.
Yes.
Somehow in our generation, like right in the 90s, early 2000s, we sort of disappeared and were just bikini models,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And weren't lowriders. But you talk to like some of the women car clubs that have emerged in these last 10 years, and they'll say, oh yeah, I got my lowrider from my mom. She was a solo rider, right? In like the 70s and 80s, right? So that means we've always existed.
Yes.
So I always have to say that the all women issue it is due to that history and that role that we've always played, but it sort of was amazing that we were able to have that issue and put 4 women on the cover. We fought really hard for that because there's always usually like one person on the cover. Though when you look at early issues of Lowrider, late 70s, even early 80s, they would have, group of people on there, right? But that was a different sort of leadership of the magazine under Sunny Madrid. So it was really great for me, for this issue, for women's history, to sort of like merge my love of lowriding, the honor, the community of women that are part of the culture, that history, and that also that idea of like social justice. And for me, as like a feminist who believes in equality, I think it was a wonderful example in all the interviews how women talked about how gender structures their life, their place in lowriding, and how they continue to fight against the institutional forms of like sexism, machismo.
No, it was a history that needed to be told for the women. It did.
Yeah.
I mean, because that really paved the way right there, showing that and coming out like that with Lowrider.
Yeah, and even the Lowrider magazine themselves, I have to give credit to like Paige Penland, who wrote the Lowrider magazine history book that came out in the early 2000s. She had a whole section on women. So I feel like Lowrider magazine over the years has done sort of that work, but I think it was really cool to have like an issue, like even all the staff we worked at Motor Trend were all women, right? So it was really cool to have that experience. And I think what's even more like how the universe has synergy is, we were working on that like at this time period last year, right? We had to finish it in like 1 month. We pretty much got the call like December.
Wow.
Me and Jessica did it all in January.
Wow.
And then had to go to production or whatever. It came out in March. And then I feel that, and then the current exhibit at the Peterson, the Best and Low that I worked on and curated, was working on that too at this time last year. And so I feel both of those opportunities that the universe gave me, as well as my experience of being in Chicano studies and teaching women's studies classes for as long as I had, is really going to be like pulled together in this new exhibit that opens up on January 30th at CSUN, Bajitas y Suavecitas.
Well, I've said it a million times, and I will say it again. Thank you so much for always including us, El Pachuco Zoot Suits, in majority of your projects, because we feel like we are connected to the lowrider community, and we are a part of that community, and we would love to continue it for many generations to come, and continue Phyllis's legacy
with the lowrider,
the very first lowrider issue. But like I said, muchas gracias. Te lo agradecemos de todo corazón. I love getting your phone calls and hey, Vanessa, we're working on this new project. What do you think? And I love hearing about them, and I love seeing all these projects come to fruition. So I can't wait to see this new exhibit. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. And
they always are.
They always are.
Well,
and then we
you.
have something coming up in March.
Yes.
At the Peterson Museum as well.
To be on the lookout for.
Yes.
It's going to be breathtaking.
It's going to be awesome.
Yes.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
Yeah. So
Thank
basically we'll catch you on the flip side, right? There'll be
Yes.
more projects will be coming out.
Yes.
Early March.
Early March.
Just switching gears for a second, I like to talk about, we lost someone yesterday, Alfred Smith, better known as Brenton Wood. He was a icon, and he was not only an icon, but he was just a person that stood out in our community, in our lowrider community, in our Mexican culture. He was somebody that shared his stories through singing, and he came and bought his first zoot suit here, I want to say back in 96, 98, around that time. And we're going to show a video later. We'll have it on our website and be showing it on Facebook of him coming in and my aunt and my mom measuring them, and us in the background. Might not recognize the store, but our condolences to his family, and it's going to be a hard time for them, and actually for a lot of people. So thank you for all the memories. Thank you for singing at my wedding. We love you. We miss you, and your legacy will live on. Anything you want to say, B?
No, I mean, you said it all. He was more than a customer. He was our friend, and he was a part of our El Pachuco family. As I'm sure a lot of people, it's a painful loss. We're all very sad, and again, our condolences to his family, his friends,
The Smith family,
and
yes.
everyone who loves him, because he's the legend, and he will continue to be. He will always be. So you will be missed, Mr. Brenton Wood.
Thank you. Anyone say, Jim?
He was also a huge friend to the Native American community
Yes.
in town.
He went to our powwows.
He came to some of the youth summer programs that I helped out at, and so friendly and great working with the kids. And he came to our powwow a few times, and just every time I met him, he was just so sweet and just kind and giving.
Very, yes. So, thank you, Denise.
Thank you again
for sharing your wisdom and your educating us on everything. That's awesome. We love that. I love to open the year on a positive note. Thank you.
Feliz Año Nuevo.
Ditto.
Happy New
Thank you
Year.
guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.
Rock that boogie, 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 rock that boogie. Check. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. All right. Chicha. Winner. Chuchepa. Chica. Chucha. All right. Rock that boogie, 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 rock that boogie. Rock